Well, here we are. As you can tell by the title, I decided not to make this a lamentation. I'll admit, it was really close. But as I've said before, and I want to get this out first, for me, lamentation isn't just something that's bad. Lamentation is the bottom of the bucket. I have no qualification that is below lamentation when it comes to a work of fiction. So, you know, when I drop it something all the way down to the level of lamentation, it takes something quite significant. In fact, as of my recording this, I've only ever had, I think, 3 lamentations in the history of my show. Threshold, Star Trek Nemesis, and All the Bravest. Final Fantasy All the Bravest. I'm pretty sure that's it. It takes quite a bit, is what I'm trying to say. I was very, very tempted to do. In fact, walking into this, I sort of assumed it would be a lamentation. But as I've said, I never decide that until I'm done. I actually made templates for the episode as if it was going to be a lamentation or if a regular thing, because I do those things months in advance. But ultimately, this episode's just kind of boring and badly written. And that's not bottom of the barrel. It's not as bad as it can be, in my opinion. This is, this is technically the worst Star Trek. Or, excuse me, no, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. This is technically not the worst Star Trek finale I've seen. Not the worst series finale. I say technically because, in my honest opinion, These Are the Voyagers is not the last final episode of Star Trek Enterprise. Now, I know you're looking at me like, but it is. Except in almost every way that matters, it isn't. It's just a frickin' holodeck program. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to spoil too much, but it is such a disconnect from Season 4. And the episode right prior to it, which I'm not going to spoil anything about, serves in many ways as a much more conclusive finale episode, and keeps the tone, characterization, directing style, crew, and general feel of what they'd been going for in Season 4. And also, while I'm on the subject, was a good episode. But I digress. Before we go any further, I looked up a number, which I'm going to bring over here right now. Would you believe it has been 4 years, 7 months, and 17 days as of today, by when you're hearing this, not when I'm hearing this, that I sat down and started recording these videos? Can you believe that? I was doing it in my own basement because I needed some place where there was no noise so people wouldn't be interfering with the recording. I started Voyager because, to me, Voyager was more interesting to talk about than the other Star Trek shows. I could talk about any Star Trek show off the top of my head, and I had confidence and some kind of strength behind doing so. You know, you asked me to talk about DS9 just right now, and I can do it without having to rewatch it, without having to reanalyze it. So, back then, when I was only doing ruminations on things that I knew, Voyager, any Star Trek really, just seemed like the obvious pick for the show feature. And it was something that a lot of people have been wanting me to talk about television shows, and Star Trek in particular. And I only had, like, say, 1,000 or so viewers back then who were regularly checking up on me. But I put out a little question being like, hey guys, what do you want me to check? And I listed a few options, including the Star Trek series, and quite a few people expressed interest in me doing a Voyager video. So that was just, as soon as I saw that other people had an interest too, I was like, yes, done. Because I wanted to talk about Voyager. If I'm being honest, doing this show alongside Babylon 5 has been very strange. Because it's, I don't want to say the word easier, but it flows better. It's smoother from my perspective to talk about Voyager than it is Babylon 5. Now that feels weird because, in my opinion, Babylon 5 is a better show. Like, in every way, really. Well, that's not true. In all but one way. And I also love Babylon 5, and it's my favorite television show of all time. And, you know, I've watched Babylon 5 many times. I'm very familiar with the show, so I have the knowledge to back up on. So, why is it that Voyager's so easier for me to talk about? And I was thinking about it, and I realized it's because there's more to discuss when it comes to Voyager. Not just in character, but out of character. I have talked about so many different concepts over the last 4.5 years of writing, of acting, of television producing, of directing, of the very technology of television and the cameras used, of the concepts of blocking and lighting and just all of this stuff. It's kind of sort of become my personal creative outlet for all these things I can't actually do, to just kind of discuss how to create a visual medium. You know, because all of this applies equally to a video game, to a television show, to a movie, and to an extent to a play or an opera. All of these concepts apply to some extent or another to all of these different visual acting mediums. And it's been a great way to just discuss and talk about all these things for me. So thank you for listening to me ramble on about the production side, just as much as I ramble on about the lore, the in lore concepts and the ideas and situations as they're going through. By contrast, over on Babylon 5, which each episode tends to be much shorter, I'm mostly talking about what's happening in lore, because there's more to discuss in lore and much less to discuss out of lore. But that brings me to this episode. This episode. Let me make this clear. I don't like this episode. As I said, it's not a lamentation, but it's bad. Like, it may be in my bottom 20 or bottom 30 of Voyager episodes. And I have to admit, at least part of that is because it's the series finale. Now, I have heard the argument that that's my fault before. I've actually heard that from Star Trek fans. You know, Lore, it's your fault. They didn't call me Lore, of course. Lore, it's your fault for looking at the situation and saying, yo, you expected too much for a series finale. Just look at it like any other episode. I can't do that. Maybe that's my fault. I will own up to the possibility that it is my fault for not being able to do that. But I look at this as the series finale. And maybe I'm a bit primed for that, because Star Trek VI was the series finale for the original series. Great finale, by the way. One of my favorite movies of all time. And then we had All Good Things, which was phenomenal. Despite logic hiccups and despite flaws in the premise, it was still brilliantly performed, brilliantly acted, and brilliantly written. And then we've got the 9 episodes leading up to and including What You Leave Behind when it comes to DS9, which, I mean, enough said, really. Then we have this. Endgame pales. Absolutely pales in comparison to those other ones. And I think that's... I think that does need to be keeping into account. Now, what's funny is they did set aside additional time and money to work on this episode. It's not like they shorted it in terms of both of those things, although there's an asterisk to that I'll be getting to. But, I know you're going to all hate me for this, but I got to bring in my old buddy, Rick Berman. Hey, Rick. Why do you ruin Star Trek so much? Well, you see, it's because I'm a complete moron. Oh, thank you. No, okay. I will actually talk more about Rick Berman and why I feel he went from a positive impact on Star Trek to an overwhelmingly negative impact on Star Trek when we go through TNG. Because Rick Berman's rise to power in the production of Star Trek happened during TNG. And then he started influencing, and we'll talk about during DS9 a bit, because Rick Berman kind of had a few things to do with DS9. And of course, he basically took over Voyager, and then let it go, and then took over Enterprise Season 1 and 2. Specifically Season 1 and 2, by the way. Just keep that in mind. But Rick Berman, why don't you tell the audience what you did with regard to this episode?
Well, you see, what I did was I had basically let Brennan Braga and,
I can't think of the other guy's name all of a sudden. Not Kenneth Biller, he's separate.
that other person basically do their own thing when it came to Voyager. I kind of approached a hands-off perspective because I was satisfied with things and just meddling every now and again to satisfy my own personal ego.
Seriously, I don't get why he meddled. Every now and again he would just reach in and be like, hey, do this. And of course he was in charge, so they had to.
But also, I had pretty much already put together the idea and been greenlit for a new Star Trek show.
I'm going to start talking in my normal voice. Hey, hang on. Ugh! Rick Berman had already greenlit Enterprise. So while season 7 of Voyager was going through, he'd already proposed it, it had already been accepted, it had already been greenlit, and the prep work of getting together cast and crew and scripts had already begun. Enterprise was already in the works when season 7 of Voyager was going through, and Enterprise was Rick Berman's baby. I will probably talk about Enterprise someday. It has been requested. All I have to say is I don't want to re-go through Enterprise Seasons 1 and 2 because, in my opinion, they're garbage. And that's the nicest way I can say that. There are some exceptions in Season 1 and 2 that are good, but for the most part, I look at Season 1 and 2 of Enterprise, and I just don't even want to watch it. And in my honest opinion, a lot of that can be landed squarely on Rick Berman's shoulders, because that was his baby. And when he finally let go of it, we got Season 3 of Enterprise, which I like. And then Season 4 of Enterprise, which I love. I know I'm not alone in this opinion, so I don't really feel like I'm being an outlier on this one. But the problem is we're talking about Endgame, aren't we? Well, funny story. So despite basically kind of going hands-off with Voyager for years, actually, at this point, he swooped in, along with Kenneth Biller, who is another, to be blunt, terrible writer, and said, "Don't worry, we'll do the ending." And Rick Berman and Kenneth Biller basically spent several weeks hammering out Endgame. Now, I know Brennan Braga is on the script there, but Brennan Braga was busy with the rest of Star Trek. Rick Berman and Kenneth Biller were off basically making Endgame, and then when it came, when the rest of the cast and crew had finished up to Renaissance Man, then they came in and brought everyone in to do Endgame. So yes, certain parts of this were written by Brennan Braga and a few other writers actually as well. But this was Rick Berman's story, and God, it shows. First of, I've got a bunch of notes here. First of all, does it sound familiar, with the advantage of hindsight, that Rick Berman swooped in and decided we're going to do the finale ourselves rather than let the people who've been running the show do it? Later on, Rick Berman and Brennan Braga would make that same mistake with Enterprise. Historically, I feel like pointing out, as much as I do give Braga both crap and praise, Braga actually apologized for that. Berman did not, but I digress. So, the second thing that happened, and this might also sound familiar, is Berman insisted on this being a time travel episode. Had to be time travel, had to be the Borg. No arguments. And I quote, the best Star Trek the best Star Trek stories have always been time travel stories. That's from Rick Berman. Now, you might be like, well, okay, so he insisted Endgame be a time travel story. Yes, that quote wasn't actually regarding Endgame, though. That quote was regarding First Contact. Because many times, at least 4 that I'm aware of, Rick Berman has swooped in and said, make it a time travel story, because time travel's awesome. So we got a time travel episode. Then Kenneth Biller said, this is a direct quote, I wrote this one down, "We decided that a big epic show could use some romance." Allow me to rant for a moment. I know I've made it clear many times why I don't like romance of the week as a concept, and why it is that I think that romance in general should not be done in fiction, because it's usually not done well. It's usually done as a fling, or just, we need some romance to spice things up. Okay, move it on. And that quote right there illustrates that attitude better than anything I could say. Oh, we're doing a big finale, so we need some romance. Quick, Seven and Chakotay, go! Jerry Ryan and Robert Beltran hated it. Like, at the time, they were polite, but firm in the fact that they both found it awkward and uncomfortable and didn't know how to do it. And it shows in every scene they're together. It feels like two people who have never acted alongside each other suddenly having to play a part of like a close family member or something like that. If you've ever seen theatrical actors, you probably know what I'm talking about. Because you can always tell when an actor is given a role that they don't know what to do with. Because they become a lot more artificial. Their movements become much more precise because they're basically running through, okay, I gotta do this, and I gotta do this. And there's no actual emotion. and they compensate for the lack of emotion in their tone by increasing or decreasing their volume. If they're trying to sound intimate, then they just talk quieter. If they're trying to sound angry or upset or hurt, then they just talk louder. And it's in so many of it's actually in basically all of their scenes together in this episode. And again, both actors were like, I don't know what to do with this, but okay, whatever. Then there's the fact that they were undecided if they should actually reach Earth or the Alpha Quadrant in this episode. Now, we don't have specific details. There was a lot of interviews and a lot of buzz, so we've actually got a lot of behind-the-scenes info on this episode. But what we do know is that they changed their mind a minimum of 3 times while the script was in production before they actually settled on, okay, fine, they'll get home. That sounds like they originally decided not that they would get home, and then they decided not get home, and then they decided would get home, just from basic math. But who knows what the hell they were thinking on that. Some of the actors liked this episode. Some of them did not. I want to bring up 2 actors in particular, Robert Beltran and Garrett Wang. Now, Lord knows those actors speaking negative of Voyager is not exactly news, because both of their characters were basically crapped on throughout the course of the show. So it makes sense that they would be upset. After all, Harry is basically a non-entity in this episode. He only matters for one scene, really. And it's the one scene where he gives the "it's the journey that matters" speech, which is not the worst speech I've ever heard, and he does a good job of it, but otherwise he might as well not even be on the camera. And Chakotay? Again, the only relevance Chakotay has in this episode is the fact that he happens to be wooing Seven. He is an aspect of her character. So in the interest of total fairness, it doesn't surprise me that both of those actors did not like this episode. However, I read through every interview. I've got my magazines and whatnot. I'm probably going to be relying on those a lot when it gets to TNG. I read through every interview about the other actors and what they said positively, most notably Robert Picardo and Roxanne Dawson. Both spoke fairly positively of the conclusion of the finale. And everything they said basically revolves around their own characters. And I don't want to sound derogatory on that, because of course that's their focus, but I mean, B'Elanna's conclusion was actually pretty good. So it makes sense Roxanne would actually be okay with that. She even has this great line I'm just going to tell you about right now rather than later about, she's talking with Tom about how this is going to go and how excited and nervous and scared she is about the fact that getting home is suddenly a real possibility. And she might be delivering her baby, but she's not going to have it delivered by a stranger. It's going to be the doctor. And I liked that scene. And then, of course, she makes fun of Tom and says, so you're just going to find the next piloting assignment, right? And his response is, nope. It was a nice scene. I liked that. So, okay, her speaking positively about that as well. And Robert Picardo, of course, he has several scenes with regards to future Janeway. He has several scenes with regards to future Janeway in the past. He's got some good material, as he always does, so it makes sense he would be happy. The weird outlier here is Kate Mulgrew. Kate Mulgrew, I'm still not sure how to pronounce that name all these years. I've heard it said both ways, by her even. Anyways, Kate Mulgrew said that she found the episode to be not bad, but not good. Which is funny, because that kind of mirrors my own thoughts. I mean, there are worse episodes than this across all of Star Trek. But it was really lackluster for a series finale, which is where a lot of my ire comes from. And there was no final oomph for the crew. When TNG ended, they got the main cast together around a poker table. Started playing poker together. And when they set off on that, the cast and crew hugged each other and cried. And, big moment, right? Kate Mulgrew actually talked with Patrick Stewart about that scene and about the filming of All Good Things. And the two, both theatrical actors, so, there's always that click thing going on there. But the two of them were talking about that, and Patrick Stewart mentioned how incredibly emotional the moment was for him. Deep Space Nine, they had multiple finale pieces there, since several of the characters said goodbye at several points throughout the course of the 9 episodes leading to the end. But when they were all finished, they all got together and they were all applauding, and they got everyone in Quark's bar set, and they were giving speeches, and they were embracing each other, and just, oh my God, we did this. This is amazing. Great big moment. You know what they did in Voyager? She gave her final lines, they cut it, and they immediately started striking the set. And that was it. There was no ceremony. And she felt very absent in that. And you know what's funny is I feel that's a damn shame, because as I just talked about last week, as I've talked about going all the way back to season 1, one of the first things I said about this show 4.5 years ago was that there was amazing chemistry between these people, and it's one of the things that helped sell this show, for me at least. And after all of that family feeling that had grown between the cast and the crew and the directors and the writers and everyone involved, to just kind of chop it off and quick, we need to get on to our next job, in my opinion, is doing it an absolute disservice. And that brings us back to Rick Berman! I'm not even kidding. Because Rick Berman was working on Enterprise. I mentioned earlier that they had plenty of time and money budget, and they actually started working on Endgame well before it was actually time. They did a lot of prep work. A lot of CGI work was done for this episode. They actually did some brand new stuff, things they'd literally never done before with regards to Foundation imaging in order to accomplish some of the effects of this episode. So, again, as ever, props to Foundation imaging. Still have lots of respect for them. But when they finally got to the episode, they were suddenly rushed. It's like, okay, we did all this prep work, okay, go, 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 go. And when they finally done it, they were literally in a rush. They wanted to strike the sets and set up the new sets as quickly as possible, because they were getting ready to do Enterprise. Yes, really. And I honestly feel like that gets across in the tone of the episode itself, because it feels rushed. It feels like they took a lackluster episode, a fairly, it's not completely nonsensical, it's not actually bad. Again, I've seen worse script, but it's a fairly just script that's just another hour of television, hour and like 30 minutes actually, because it's a two-parter, but you get the point. And then they just kind of were like, okay, go, 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 come on, get to the next scene, get to the next scene. And with very few exceptions, it just felt like every scene was just trying to get to the next scene. A lot of scenes existed for no reason. I'll be talking about this as we go through the episode proper, but there's several points where it's just like, well, this is happening. Why? Like it never occurred to anyone to use a scene for a purpose in an episode of television. But of course, Rick Berman, Kenneth Biller, what do you expect? Also, while we're on the subject of ridiculous, there's two other things I want to talk about before we get to the episode proper. First of all, it was the intent of Rick Berman and the other writers. I don't know who else is included in this. I just know Rick Berman is specifically included in this. But Rick Berman and the other writers wrote this episode with the possibility in mind that the Borg were defeated forever. Really? Now, Lord knows I'm a little bit of a Borg fan. I don't actually make that fact quiet. But I'm also a Borg detractor, because I understand the tremendous problems the Borg represent from a writing perspective. So defeating the Borg is something that should at least be considered on the table from a writing perspective. But this episode is not about the Borg. In fact, the Borg are not the villains of this episode. They happen to be... They're the villains of this episode in the same way that a speed bump is a villain of you trying to cross across a parking lot. I mean, it's in the way, but it's not really what the obstacle is. It's not really something that's trying to defeat you, or is opposing you, or has some big evil scheme. It's just there. And this is the episode that they were legitimately thinking about permanently killing off the Borg. And by the way, in canon, we don't actually know if that's true. There have been 2 book series, to my knowledge, that have continued the Star Trek canon after this episode. they've done their own things with the Borg, both of them. There's also Star Trek Online, which has also done its own thing with the Borg. So we've got 3 potential future storylines, all of which say, no, the Borg are fine. Because of course they are. It's ridiculous that they would be defeated here. In fact, if I may be so bold, one of the things they keep bringing up is how they want to deal a crippling blow to the Borg. And it's like, all I can think of is, gosh, you're right. If you destroy this hub, all they're going to have to do is have 5 other hubs that they can use just like this one. I mean, really? Anyways. The other thing I want to talk about is, it's funny going straight from Renaissance Man to this episode, because Renaissance Man was a smart episode, and I described what that meant there, so I'm not going to rehash the definition here. It also had very good blocking. I mentioned both of these points because this episode is the opposite in both ways. This is a dumb episode. It relies on you shutting your brain off, rather than encouraging you and rewarding you for having your brain on. And the blocking is actually kind of bad. In fact, I'd say the overall directing of this episode is kind of bad. But I digress. Let's start talking about the episode proper. So first we have one of the weirdest teasers ever. Very boring. Voyager's back, and she's watching it. Cut to teaser. Huh? I mean, yeah, okay, you got my attention because they made it home, but huh? And they have all the aging makeup, they've got the little reunion scene, which felt very, very awkward. It's funny, I've praised so many times the chemistry these actors have together. There's like no chemistry in that room. It's kind of weird. Also, the Doctor calls himself Joe. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to continue to refer to him as the Doctor, if that's okay with you. Then there's one little scene. There's actually 2 scenes in this whole episode that I actually like. And one of them is where Barclay steps up and dings a thing and gives a speech before the crowd. First of all, I've never hidden the fact that I am a big fan of Dwight Schultz. So, shrug. But second of all, it was a nice touch to show how far Barclay has come as a character, as an individual, in lore, in character. Remember, even though Barclay had gotten to the point where he had specific individuals he felt comfortable around and friends, if you asked him to get up in front of a stage and speak in front of those, his friends back on the old Enterprise D, he would be like, oh, no, and he'd be stuttering and shaking and totally nervous about it. Him going up there and calmly speaking and talking about that really shows a lot of how far he's come and how much more comfortable he is, at least with this group of people. It was a nice touch, and it was a good scene. Even better made when Schultz does a great job of lapsing back into stuttering. Slowly, even. He doesn't just kind of suddenly start stuttering. It's like he slowly starts clipping his speech more and more until it turns into outright stuttering. It's a nice touch. But anyways, then there's the classroom scene, which serves no purpose. I'm serious. It's a classroom scene where they bring up temporal mechanics and the Borg. Anyone who has ever written anything ever will tell you, perfect. It's a perfect setup to put in some foreshadowing or some information or something that is related to the plot. Nope, it's just there for padding. Doesn't have anything to do with anything. Okay. That's just the first. There's several scenes like that. Then we cut, and it by the way, the episode kind of goes back and forth between the past and the present with no real regard to flow is the word I want to use there. I wanted to say blocking, but that's not quite right. But to explain what I mean, let me just explain by the opposite. Go watch All Good Things sometime. They start off doing sudden shifts. Just chunk, and then you're in a different timeline. Chunk, and you're in a different timeline. And each time, Patrick Stewart is like, whoa. As the episode goes on, he becomes more accustomed to them. And the actual edits start flowing with actions. He enters a turbolift, and doors close, and then they open, and he's in a new place. Or he's walking forward and bumps into someone, and it turns into someone from a different timeline. And they keep smoothing out those transitions as Picard, in character, is getting more adjusted to moving through the timelines. That is kind of the opposite of what they've got here, where they just kind of randomly say, yep, future, past, future, past, future, future, past, future, past, future, past, future, past. Sorry. I told you, it's just me. I'm just a dramatic person. I'm sorry. So the classroom scene is wasteful, and they just kind of jump back and forth. And then there's a scene where Tom is a typical incompetent, husband. Oh God, I need to come to sick bay. And B'Elanna is, of course, smooth as ice. You gotta have the comedy there somewhere. I mean, that's how comedy works, right? You make fun of someone for being, incompetent or silly, right? That's what comedy is. Because apparently we're watching frickin' Looney Tunes. I'm sorry, I'm getting mean. I don't like this episode. It's not lamentation material, but I do not like this episode. So, then there's Chakotay and Seven. Ugh. I've already kind of started talking about this. Okay, I gotta tell you, on my notes here, it literally just says Chakotay and Seven rant. That's all my notes say, because I don't need any further notes to discuss this topic. It's all up here. I've already talked about the major problems. The actors don't have the chemistry. They're kind of forcing their movements and their audio. They didn't like it. It's always obvious, in my opinion, when you have two actors who don't like each other, who have to be, I'm saying that wrong, who don't want, who disagree with who their character is romantically connected to, and then are forced to be romantically connected to that person, in character, I mean. Actually, a perfect example of this on a show I praise the hell out of is Deep Space Nine. To be blunt, Nana Visitor and Renee Auberjonois' performances as the two of them as a couple are very stilted and very artificial, in basically the exact same way that Chakotay and Seven are. And it is my opinion that it's for the exact same reason. Because they don't want to be in a relationship. Now, I don't mean in real life, but my point is, one of the things any actor who has been acting for any period of time will tell you, you get into that headspace. You may be able to swap in and out at will. That depends on the individual actor. But all actors know how to get into the headspace of their character. They know their character. They live and breathe their character. They get mannerisms and vocal tics and all sorts of they've got all these tools at their disposal, and that's their character. It can be argued, has been argued, that most actors know their characters better than the writers do. Lord knows Kate Mulgrew does, but again, I'll get to that in a minute. So, when an actor honestly believes their character should not be in a relationship with another character and disagrees with it, it tends to come out in their performance. Because what happens is they get in their headspace and they say, well, I shouldn't be in this relationship because my character wouldn't be. So, they fake it. Now, a really good actor will make that work. But the other 90% of the time, you see a fake relationship. Next problem with it, of course, is the fact that it happened off camera. I'd say it wasn't hinted at all, but that's not entirely true. In fact, again, going back to Kenneth Biller's quote, we needed some romance in this epic show. They literally were just casting about like, completely forgetting the fact that in the previous episode, the Doctor professed his love for Seven. That was literally the previous episode. They decided the fact that Seven used the Chakotay hologram during Human Error was a jump-off point. And there, boom, we'll put those together. Great, done. No further thought put into it. I mean, what is this, a checklist? Is that what we're doing at this point? What does a finale include? Action sequences, threats, and romance. Big explosions. Gotta have the big explosions. What else? Time travel. Gotta have time travel. So, the next reason it pisses me off is because it's something that is actually arguably the core intended plot point of the episode. Literally. The entire episode is intended to revolve around the Seven and Chakotay romance, because she dies, and then he dies. And that's pretty much Janeway's stated motivation for coming home, alongside Tuvok. That's the whole reason the whole episode happens, is because of that. And the only reason that happens is because the two of them get together, and therefore it's the fulcrum plot point, right? You know, I really hate to point this out, but they could have done basically the exact same thing and just had it be Tom and B'Elanna. Have their child survive. Have B'Elanna die during an mission or during an attack. Have Tom grief-stricken, waste away. We would have had some investment then. Like, almost 6 years of investment, actually, because of how long they took themselves working up to that. And it would have been even more powerful because then they would have left behind a child who Janeway would know and therefore have a more personal, emotional connection to someone, which would motivate her to save her parents. But no, we can't have that. I'm going to save the rest of the rant. I don't want to get into it. Then there's Tuvok's illness, which of course is a perfectly designed illness we've never even heard of before that requires a mind meld with a compatible Vulcan. It is so precisely crafted to be something that makes it so Tuvok has to get home sooner. Again, for the reasons I already mentioned. They have to come up with some artificial reason for Admiral Janeway to change the timeline. I mean, they can't come up with a real reason for her to change the timeline. That would be ridiculous. I'm sorry to beat this point into the ground, but this is one of the reasons why I say the script of this episode is incredibly poorly constructed. I'm building up to that point, but just bear in mind, they had to specifically make this fulcrum relationship out of thin air that happened off camera, by the way, and invent a disease that is very specifically requires this specific cure, which for some reason the doctor, who, I remind you, cured something back in the Alpha Quadrant, personally, that Alpha Quadrant doctors could never come up with a cure for, he can't do anything about. No. What? Let's move on. So, then we've got Neelix. Neelix, I only have two things to talk about Neelix. He's basically a cameo in this episode. Just a reminder, hey, he's still there. I do actually like the idea of Seven going to Neelix for romance advice, as weird as that sounds, for two reasons. One, I know you probably don't even remember this, but Neelix was one of the first people to really reach out a hand to her. One of three, actually. No pun intended. Janeway, Tom, and Neelix are the three people who embraced Seven and was like, you're part of the crew, we're going to help you through this, I got your back, I don't judge you for this. You know, I talked about that when she first joined the crew, and those three people were important to her. So it makes sense to me that those three people would be part of that close friend circle that she would have, especially since she's still working away through her social issues, because for some reason we've decided she's staying in the same general social position she's been in for the last 4 goddamn years. But anyways, I digress. So it does make sense that she would go to Neelix about that, and more to the point, Neelix can't tell anyone about it. I actually like that point more, because Seven is, let's be honest, extremely prideful. And it's actually kind of a very Vulcan thing. She does not want anybody to know, not only about the relationship itself, but that she's out of her league, that there's something she doesn't understand and wants help and needs help from. Nobody's going to ask Neelix about that. And she trusts Neelix, being that early friendship thing. So he's actually a perfect fit for that. So credit where credit is due. Also, she says, we'll contact you later. Now, that's a funny thing. Now, thanks to Star Trek Online, we know that, at least in Star Trek Online's canon, which I'm sorry, I do personally consider to be the canon of Star Trek, at least until proven otherwise with something better, assuming something better ever happens, which it probably won't at this point. Lord knows Discovery is having its issues right now, which are, again, not going to get into it. That means that Neelix is basically waiting for a call that isn't coming. And he will probably look up on that, and he'll probably try to figure out what the hell happened. And I find it curious to think of how that would go. See, Voyager can still contact him because they've got the tech. And Voyager could contact the Alpha Quadrant because they've got the tech. They've got a specific setup between Voyager and Pathfinder group, Barclay's group. How are they going to contact Neelix? Now, I imagine they would eventually reach out to him and do so, especially since there are many benefits for Starfleet reaching out to the Delta Quadrant. But I find it interesting to think that Neelix would have been depressed and morose for months, if not years, thinking that all of his crew had gone to investigate some... Like, the last thing he heard was there's some weird wormhole thing in a nebula. And then he doesn't hear from them again for months or years. Now, he wouldn't admit he was depressed. I imagine he would be like, oh, they finally found their way home. And be happy for them. But in his heart of hearts, he'd be thinking, God, something horrible happened to them. And then, of course, he finally gets word, and that would be a great moment of, yeah, you're alive, and it happened, and you get home, and oh, that's great, tell me everything, Anyways. So then we have another scene that has no purpose in existing. In fact, we have basically 3 scenes that have no purpose in existing. First is something about the Callidians, which I actually wrote that down because it's only mentioned once. And it's about this race we've never heard of. And the specific star date that keeps being repeated over and over. And Tuvok is clearly worked up about this, and clearly this has some significance to do with the plot, and no, actually it has nothing to do with anything. This is a breadcrumb trail whose only purpose is to ensure that Tuvok can get information to the Doctor, can get information to Barclay, who then gets information back to the Doctor, who gets information to Harry, who then tries to talk Janeway out of it, and then fails. It's the only reason for those scenes. Now, tell me, what is the purpose of those scenes? Really? Does it advance the characters any? Does it advance the themes, the plot, or the setting? If I am to be very generous, I would say that the final scene, when Janeway doesn't actually out loud admit, but through her silence acknowledges, the bonds of family and the fact that this is a suicide mission, that's a nice touch right there. But that's it. All those scenes only really culminate in that. Oh, that reminds me. Then we've got the Klingon. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Ugh. Ugh. There's this Klingon who was not politically connected. We know this. Janeway had to pull strings with Starfleet in order to get him a seat on the High Council. Now, okay. And in exchange for this, he's going to give her a time travel device. Now, I'm going to say this in one of those sentences that's designed to provoke a response, so forgive me, but a Klingon living in a cave is trying to sell Janeway a time travel device. This is never explained. It's never mentioned if he got it from someone else, reverse engineered it, designed it himself, stole it, nothing. No explanation. He's got a time travel device. He's also, while we're on the subject, he's also willing to sell a time travel device, which is, in addition to everything else, another layer of stupid. Then he tries to pull this hard negotiating tactic with her. And I just roll my eyes at it because it has so much of the typical... I don't know which writer wrote that scene, and I don't care, because it's bad no matter who it is. Braga, Biller, Berman, doesn't matter. They're all the P's, aren't they? It's bad. It's like your stereotypical writing 101, here's how to write a tough character negotiating scene kind of thing. You've seen it 1,000 times. You'll probably see it 1,000 more times. In fact, you'll see it again in this episode. Later on, when the Borg Queen and when Janeway are negotiating back and forth, you could just replace I know that sounds weird. Just replace the lines and it's the same scene. But what I mean by that is the structure of the, offer. Counteroffer. No. Counteroffer, amendment. And it's the exact same format, is what I'm trying to say. You could basically take a template for the scene and just smash it down on both of them. So then the Klingon sells the Admiral a time travel device. Now, the Borg reveal would have been better if not for the fact that at the time, every advert thing ever was constantly talking about this episode. Now, they actually kept the script of this episode very tightly under wraps. There weren't any leaks that I was aware of at the time. And during my research, I didn't see anything about leaks getting out. But the two facts we knew about this episode walking into it were time travel and Borg. We all knew that. And, of course, those are the big draws, right? That's the marketing campaign thing going on. I mention that because the reveal of the Borg is actually very well done and very, oh my God, kind of a moment. That worked very well. And in fact, for once, Voyager actually reacted exactly as they should when suddenly having a near collision encounter with a cube. Get the hell out of Dodge. That scene is immediately ruined by the Queen giving orders to the collective. if you don't understand why I have a problem with that scene, I don't really feel like rehashing it again. I feel like I've talked about this at least 3 times now across my show. We'll talk about Star Trek stuff. So all I'm going to say is just to put emphasis on the words so you understand my objection, and then we'll move on. The Borg Queen gives commands to the collective. Moving on. Also, for some reason, the shields that she brings back are incompatible with Voyager, even though there's no reason ever given for that other than they need the Voyager to be weaker, and also we didn't think this through. I'm going to skip ahead of my notes just a little bit. So all this in Klingons, we got to have that first act action sequence. Klingons, attack! And then Harry shows up, and then they talk with Harry, and Harry didn't talk. Yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead, Captain. He defers to her, as always. And then she goes back in time. And then, you know, Huey Lewis and the News start playing. I actually don't have that many notes left, really. I'm going to save a topic here for later. There's actually something I want to talk about in a scene we just passed, but just bear me out, okay? So then we see a scene where the Queen basically effortlessly reaches out to Seven while she's regenerating, talks with her, shows her stuff, and then overloads her thing. I actually like that scene. It's the second scene I like. Because A, it's Alice Krieg and she's awesome, but B, it's also the fact that she's demonstrating just how incredibly outmatched Voyager is and should be. It's one of the rare scenes where the Borg actually feel like the frickin' Borg, you know? Then there's the Taurus scene. I actually already mentioned that, so I don't really need to rehash that. I have a note here. The Borg are not actually the villains. I kind of mentioned that before. Wow, I really don't have that many notes left. God, this was just such a dull episode. I found myself just watching it. I was sitting like this. I can demonstrate, because I'm sitting in this chair when I watch these episodes. I'm like this. And I'm ready to go, because oftentimes I'll have so many notes I have to pause whatever I'm watching in order to be able to write them all down. But in this case, I'm ready to go. I'm watching it, right? Watching the screen. This is something I've brought up before with regards to my main Friday ruminations. If I don't have anything to say, then I don't say anything. That's my one truly hardcore rule for my show. I say until I have nothing left to say, and then I say nothing more. I don't pad, and I don't try to stretch it out, and I don't try to shrink it. I talk until I'm done talking. Sometimes I just don't have anything to say about a work, you know? And that's a lot of this episode. Now, I do actually have a couple more things to say. There was huge chunks of this episode that just was like, yep, okay. And I think that is actually leading into one thing I have right now. I actually do have a note about what I'm talking about right now. It's called, Will They Get Home? You remember that? It used to be the structure of a lot of episodes in early Voyager. Will they get home? And the answer was no. The second episode of the entire series was a Will They Get Home plot. They did, like, I forget the number. I looked it up at the time. An exorbitantly large number of the first few episodes of the series were Will They Get Home plots. Or of the first season, excuse me. So this is a Will They Get Home Again plot. The only difference is they do. They actually do get home. In almost every way, it follows the same general structure. It's just Borg instead of typical villain of the week, and some time travel thrown into the mix. And that makes sense, given that Kenneth Biller and Rick Berman wrote it, because they also did a lot of work on the earlier stuff that I just mentioned. But rather than bash them again, I want to talk about something else. The Borg are known for many things. When you actually sit down and analyze and discuss them, they're known for a lot of things, actually, and there's a lot of interesting things about them. But let's assume for a moment that you're an idiot named Rick Berman who doesn't really understand the Borg. So what do you know about the Borg? Okay. They can adapt and they can assimilate, right? Those are like the two things everyone knows about the Borg. So we're going to have our crew with fancy new technology go in, fight the Borg, and then leave. Now, it's obvious why this happened from a writer's perspective, because it gave the Borg a chance to adapt and assimilate, so that they could adapt to this new technology and try to use it. In fact, using this technology at all was actually kind of dangerous on behalf of either Janeway. But the fact that Captain Janeway gets to their destination and says, nope, we're turning around right now, is actually one of the stupidest goddamn things. In character, I mean. That right there, in my blunt opinion, would be a mutiny moment. And I mean that totally sincerely. You have a rare opportunity to have basically no opposition. You have a way home. You know exactly where it is. You have all this tech which could help you against the Borg in the future, which needs to be analyzed and distributed to the rest of Starfleet basically right freaking now. Because by merely introducing it to the Borg's consciousness, you have just increased your relevance to them. That's how that works. You remember what Guinan said all the way back in Q? Now that they know about you, they'll be coming. We also happen to know, by the way, that the Borg have the ability to warp in approximately within freaking visual range of Earth, which is so close from a spatial perspective that I can't even put that into words. That's practically upper orbit at that point. Like way upper orbit. I forget the actual proper term for that. It's like low Earth orbit, middle orbit, upper orbit, and there's like this other one. But anyways, you get the point. You'd still be affected by the gravity. Okay, I'm saying this wrong. The point being, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that the Borg have this conduit right there. But that's okay. We found it, and it leads straight to home, literally. I just, oh my God. I just, what? And then you decide to leave just to make sure that the Borg have more of time to focus on you and adapt and try to deal with you, rather than taking it to someone who might actually be able to use it or analyze it or reproduce it before the Borg decide to actually do something about it. And then you decide, well, you know what, why don't we take out this installation? Now, okay, I get it. We want to deal a crippling blow to the Borg. And that's why I say that I don't think Rick Berman understands the Borg. Taking out one of 6 of the hubs of the Borg is not a crippling blow to the Borg. That would be a crippling blow to most major organizations. The Borg is not a major organization. The Borg are a freaking hurricane. They don't think like a culture do. Okay, that's bad grammar. They don't think like a culture does. Excuse me. They don't think like a society does. Losing 1/6 of their thing just means they have to either rebuild it or find something new. The collective is still there. The Borg are still there. And they still have the ability to transwarp all frickin' over the place. They can even do it without the hub. This is... And I say this because I cannot in good conscience believe that this crew, in character, who have so much experience with the Borg, does not also understand what I, an idiot who talks on the internet, knows about the Borg. But I do happen to know more about the Borg than Rick Berman does. Next thing I want to rant... I could probably put away my notes at this point. Next thing I want to rant about is the time travel inconsistency. So here's the thing. I'm just going to bring up a plot hole that is a plot hole. It is. However, in the interest of fairness, we can talk around this plot hole by assuming that the Borg Queen is a moron. I'm serious. Her final plot, the danger that has to be overcome in the final act, because you have to have a climactic finale for this kind of thing. You can't have some touching character reunions or moments like Deep Space Nine or TNG did. No, that's ridiculous. No, we have to have some big explosion thing in the final few minutes of the episode. Sorry. No. The Borg Queen's final plan is to destroy Voyager. Doing so will ensure that future Janeway will never exist, and therefore these events will have never happened. Do I even need to explain why that's all kinds of wrong? There's at least 2 levels to this, so forgive me. I've often said that time and time travel just kind of makes sense in my brain. It Tetrises in there pretty well. So I admit that this may just me being me, and I apologize if that's true. Because I've had lots of times where I've had to explain time and concepts to people, and they're like, oh, okay. So let's assume for a moment that we've got this timeline, and so Janeway's like, oh, I'm going to go back here and change history. If the rules of time... See, this is... I hate to bash this point yet again. Star Trek is so inconsistent on this. But time travel, the problem with writing time travel is that people don't write it consistently. You pick your rules of how time travel works, and then you stick to them. And it's actually not that hard to do. All you have to do is define the rules. So if Janeway goes back and alters time and is still there having done so, okay, that means that she can alter the timeline freely and all willy-nilly, and it doesn't impact her or the future she was from. Either this is an alternate timeline theory, or she has the time traveler's exemption clause, which, for those who don't know what it means, it means that people traveling through time have some kind of natural resistance to changes in the timeline. Ergo, she could go back and alter history all she wants. It's still the same timeline, but she is unaffected by it personally, her and the things she brought with her. So whatever moved through time is unaffected by the changes to time. You with me? Because it already happened in the future. So if this is how the episode presents its rules of time travel, and I'm okay with that, it's either an alternate timeline, which I don't like, or it's the time traveler's exemption clause, which I do like, and either way that's consistent. Then the Borg Queen's final plan is to destroy Voyager, to change the timeline so that Elder Janeway will have never existed and never be able to give the virus to them and never start these events to begin with. Problem. That's inconsistent. I mean, do I even need to keep going? It doesn't work both ways. If that was the way it worked, this plan would have never worked from the beginning. None of this would have ever worked because she's planning on altering her own personal time stream. And, in addition to that, it wouldn't work because that timeline has already been irrevocably altered, leading to the events that lead to the Borg Queen going, ah. So again, it's either a plot hole, because they don't know how to write consistent time travel, or the Borg Queen is an idiot. Take your pick. Then they sail towards home. They never make it, of course. I'm sorry, I've always found it amusing. I know this is basically entering nitpick territory, but I've always found it amusing that Voyager never actually gets back to Earth. They're right there, but then no, it cuts to credits. Funny fact. I've already talked about this, but several people have mentioned how they were interested in Voyager not actually getting home on the writing staff. And I just kind of look at that like... In fact, that's actually the reason Harry's speech was in the episode, that it's about the journey, not the destination. It was there to kind of help preface the fact that originally, in one of the earlier drafts of the script, they didn't make it home. And you can kind of tell, because the script is basically structured in a way that, okay, it's structured like a will would they get home again plot, and they don't. Because it's like, all right, we go through the thing, but we have to take the aperture back to save our lives. So we've dealt a blow to the Borg, a crippling blow to the Borg, but we still have a journey ahead of us. That's okay. Set a course for home, cut to credits. You could tell that was the original intent, and then they just kind of adjust things so that Voyager somehow ended up inside a sphere. They never explained that. And then busts its way out of a sphere. End up in a sphere that was attacking them, which stops attacking them or anything as soon as it exits the transwarp hub, of course, and doesn't cause any problems for the fleet that's prepared. Oh, by the way, just for once, there's actually a fleet around Earth. I just mentioned that because that's so rare for Star Trek. How many times now has there been a plot where the Enterprise is the only ship in range of Earth? I mean, seriously. They've used that plot in at least 3 movies I can think of off the top of my head. Anyways. And then, yeah, we made it. Okay, let's go home. Woo. Let's talk about Janeway, shall we? This is the final note I'm going to talk about in character, then I'm going to kind of wrap things up a bit. There is no argument that the writers did not think Janeway's character arc through. I've already made that point clear. The writers have been so inconsistent with Janeway's character across the series, and in my opinion, that's the biggest reason why so many people don't like Janeway as a character. I myself have fought against that for many years, for more years than I've been doing this show, actually. Because I think that's all on the writers not deciding on a character and character arcs for her. Instead, just kind of going with whatever they particularly interpret her as. And I've already told you guys what Kate Mulgrew's own interpretation of her character is, which happens to be alongside my own interpretation and many other Star Trek fans' interpretations, because it's the only consistent trait throughout the whole of Voyager, and that's that Janeway is not a captain. She does not have the competency to deal with this. She is out of her element, and she goes through traumatic circumstances and is broken by it. This episode bears that out, although I have no doubt that was unintentional. Because what is Janeway's motive for changing history? In the past, you have a crew who is happy, with the exception of Harry, and even Harry's just kind of fine with it, really. Everyone is happy and at home. Tom himself has a line, I am home. This is family. They are family. That's been something that's been hammered in over and over throughout season 7. So they're happy. They don't want time to change. If they get home quickly, whatever, you know. In the future, they're happy and together and family, and they've all gone on with their lives, and they're all successful and doing great. The only exceptions are Tuvok, Chakotay, and Seven. Everyone else is doing universally great, not merely good. They have all gotten their happy ending, except for the 22 crewmen, of course. I do like that Janeway has that number memorized, by the way. It's a nice touch. It reminds me of that one bit with the doctor. Did you ever go back and count? I'm not going to say anything else about that, but I'm sure some of you know what I mean by that. But that is very in character with how Kate Mulgrew has interpreted her character and how we have interpreted her character. She is broken. She is a flawed, broken, emotionally turmoiled individual who has become a jaded, cynical, bitter old woman because the journey cracked her in two. Because she broke her back getting that crew home. And by God, she can't take it anymore. Remember, no matter what, she did this mission knowing it was a suicide mission. She makes that very clear to Harry in the first act, or I guess actually second act, excuse me, in the first half. And when she gets there, she has no problem volunteering for what is in every way suicide. In many ways, it's actually worse than suicide. She was fortunate that the thing she was on blew up. And that is very in character for the broken Janeway. That she just wanted this to end. She wanted to save the younger Janeway from the horrors that she had gone through. And Kate Mulgrew's interviews about this back this idea up, that when she was finding her mindset, her getting into the headspace for Elder Janeway, for Admiral Janeway, that's exactly how she was portraying the character. From the actress's, no, this isn't from me, from her own words, from her own lips. And I think that is incredibly accurate. And it's actually funny because I don't consider that a bad thing, really. Her motivations are effectively illogical and not the kind of thing a captain should do. From a purely pragmatic perspective, you're looking at changing a happy past to alter a happy future because there happen to be a couple of niggles in it. However, and this is where her being broken comes in, she's willing to throw all of this to the wind because of one person. It's made very clear that it's not about Chakotay, which is a shame because I think it should at least have been partially about Chakotay and Tuvok, but it's made very clear it's all about Seven. However, if we are to be generous, remember, all three of those people are pretty much her closest friends. Her closest friend from forever ago, Tuvok, the person that grew to be her trusted confidant, Chakotay, and her surrogate daughter, Seven. Losing these three people to her was something she could not resist, something she could not endure. You remember why Kirk torpedoed his entire career, asked his people to literally mutiny against Starfleet? He did it for the sake of one man, Spock. Did we decry him for that? I mean, Star Trek 3 had its problems, but did we look and say, why is Kirk doing this? That's nonsensical. No, we didn't. Because he did it for his family, for his brethren, because he cared about an individual, because he was flawed. He was a human being. I mention this because it aggravates me that this was so clearly, and again, through all interviews, this is very clear. This was not intentional on behalf of anyone writing this episode, to demonstrate the flawed human Janeway doing something emotional, doing something connected to her that was effectively the wrong choice to do, doing it for the right reasons, just like Kirk did. I think this one point, more than anything else, lifted this out of lamentation territory. Kate Mulgrew's performance and her own interpretation of the character, which so neatly lines up with my own and so many others, manages to push this just just to the shore of other works, of Ruminations. I guess that's it. 4 years, 7 months, and 17 days since I first put this shirt on and sat in front of actually the same webcam. Actually, that's not true. I had to replace it once. It's the same model of webcam. And started recording these. It's a weird feeling. I would be lying if I said I wasn't getting a little bit emotional about this. I have been last couple of days while I've been recording these final episodes. I've shared the last 4.5 years of my life with you guys. It has been an absolute treat and honor to go through this show. For all its flaws, I still love Voyager. And I'm not in the least bit ashamed of that. And just because I point out its flaws does not mean I don't love it. I mean, I started a whole new feature called Keeping Perspective just to emphasize that point. But as much as I'm looking forward to TNG and as much as I'm looking forward to DS9, this has been a joy, I think is the word I want to use. This has been a joy going through this show. I do have one last Voyager thing planned. I don't have an ETA, so you might not see it next week. That is the intention, but my time availability is, as always, just kind of all over the place. And to make this clear, one way or the other, TNG or DS9 will not be starting in my Tuesday slots until Babylon 5 is finished. I want to make that 100% clear for anybody watching this when this comes out. I've had fun, guys. I'll see you next time.